Welcome to Cost 102, which is organizing your resources for cost management in GCP. Hopefully, you've all had lunch. If you haven't, I apologize for the taunting donut truck prominently featured in several slides. Sorry in advance. There will be no donut truck, but hopefully we'll give you some great ideas about how to manage your costs on GCP. So as a reminder, this session has Dory, our internal Q&A system, linked out of the Next 19 app on your phones. So if you have questions, or you want to see what other people are asking as we go, please fire up the app, click through, and you can both vote up questions and add your own. Now, today, we are here to answer one important question that I think is relevant to everyone using GCP, from the tiniest solo developer to the largest multinational corporation. And the question is, what is the best way to structure your resources in order to understand and manage cost on GCP? Now, this is not a question that you can answer once on your first day, or after your first year, or 5 years into using GCP. It's a question I think you always have to ask yourself on your journey in our platform. And we'll take that journey together today, going from tiny to large, and answer the question along the way. Again, a reminder for those who just joined, there's a Dory Q&A link in your app on your phone if you'd like to ask questions. We'll also leave lots of time at the end to take questions live. So we'll introduce the concepts we're talking about, a couple of definitions. We'll dive into a hello world. I think no cloud presentation would be right without a little hello world for the developers in the audience. We'll talk about organizations in GCP, a method for structuring your resources. We'll talk about folders, and we'll talk about labels, and how those concepts help influence the design of your applications, and how you can use them to do reporting and reasoning about costs. We'll also touch on some more advanced topics and cross-link over to a couple of other sessions that are happening that dive deeper into customer examples, into the BigQuery billing export, into using Data Studio, and other more advanced tools. So let's get started. First, who am I? I'm James. I am a product manager in Google Cloud Billing. And Cloud Billing has a mission inside of Google's larger mission. Our mission is to make billing trustworthy, transparent, simple, and predictable. And each one of those is quite important, especially when you're living in a world where, if you wanted to, you could have 100,000 cores, or a whole pile of RAM, or petabytes of storage. We really want to make sure you know exactly what you're spending, why you're spending it, and give you great levers and tools to manage your workloads. And we try to do that at the lowest possible prices. We have a long history of driving down the cost of compute on the back of Google's innovation in infrastructure and our scale. Whoops. What will you learn? We'll look at projects in the context of organizations and folders. We'll look at labels for slicing and dicing cost across those projects and folders. And we'll look at exports and reports that help you track and trace those costs as you use your workloads, as you run workloads on GCP. We're going to start as a solo developer. One person, one garage, one dog. I'm told you have to have all three, otherwise the chemistry's just not right. And we'll go all the way up to a multinational corporation with thousands of employees around the world. And we'll look at these tools and how they apply at each step of that journey and that growth. Now, quick, show of hands. How many here are solo developers, dog or not? One person, one computer. Got one in the back, thank you. Two, awesome. No dog in the bag? No, they wouldn't let you, I know. How many of you are in a startup, small company, just getting going? About another quarter of folks here. Small to medium-sized company? Somewhere in the middle, not a startup, not a huge company? How about a large organization, big multinational? It's about half, bringing in the rest. Great, okay, great diversity. And we'll try to answer these questions for every one of those types of usage. We're going to show a couple of best practices along the way. You'll see these slides with a big, bright heading and a best practice, and we'll summarize them all at the end. And of course, this whole presentation, both in slide form and in video, are available online afterwards, so don't worry about taking notes. A couple of definitions. We'll talk about organizations, folders, projects, labels, and billing accounts, and I'll dive into each one of these so you don't have to speed read below here. First, an organization in the context of GCP is this kind of top-level parent of all of your folders, projects, and resources. And it's a way to centrally apply identity, permissions, and policies across everything in your organization, in your own company or institution. And organizations really give you this level of comfort. You can apply policy once, you know it applies everywhere. They're typically linked to your company's domain. So you might have a G Suite domain, whether or not you use G Suite services, that's tied to that organization. And members of that domain would have a set of permissions within GCP. Organizations contain folders, nested up to 4 levels deep, which are a way to narrow down those permissions and policies in a way that mirrors the structure of your company or of your teams. We'll talk about that, more about that in a moment. Once we get below orgs, folders, we get down to projects. These are the core building blocks and the place where workloads live in GCP. And they're the most important for us when we talk about how billing is structured and reported in our world. Just about everything runs in the context of a project, and that's the most important context you'll see when you're looking at your costs. Now, a project can only live in one folder. So we have to have a way to cross-cut and report across folders, across projects, anywhere you want to see that labeled usage. So our cross-cutting structure is called a label, which is a key value pair, a label key that you define, and a value associated with it that you can attach to a project or to resources below the project level. We'll look at a bunch of examples about that in a couple of minutes. Finally, got to the big green dollar sign. A billing account is this container that pays for usage within projects. And a project is always paid for by a single billing account in GCP. Once we have those basic structures, we can start to use them to manage the visibility of our costs, seeing what's happening at each of those levels, the accountability, who's causing spend, the control to apply budgets and alerts and to forecast that spending, and intelligence to start to reason about how to reallocate spending, how to drive it down, and how to take control of costs on our platform. So this leads us to our first best practice, which is the finest grain detail you can get about billing is inside your BigQuery billing export. And this is something you can turn on for your entire GCP account. It's worth turning it on day one. It will give you the most minute detail we give you about everything happening in billing. And we'll look at example queries and examples of that export in a couple of minutes. All right, we're into Hello World. This is where we write a C program that's 8 lines long. No, I'm kidding. This is where we talk about the basics. One project, one small company. A startup with their dog. So we have a billing account and a single project sitting under it. Within that project, we have some workloads running, and these might be familiar to you. There's many dozens of services within GCP, but in this project, we have Compute Engine, Kubernetes, Cloud Storage, BigQuery, and Cloud SQL all running. And they're all funded by this one billing account paying for the one project they all reside in. And I've drawn 2 different color lines here for a reason. The green dotted line on top is pays for. The billing account pays for all of the usage within a project. Separately, the project owns the resources contained within it. I drew two color lines because the permissions on your billing account and the permissions on your project are separate. You can give a user in your organization superpowers on their billing account. They can be a billing account administrator and have full view of your costs, but have no control or visibility or access to any of those resources within a project. It's a really important point. We'll come back to it again later. But that's why I have this vision test to see dotted and solid lines. We'll get rid of the detail below just for simplicity and talk really about billing accounts and projects. So you were one developer with your dog in a bag, and you've now hired two more. You hired Bob and Alice. Bob and Alice are great. You hired two great developers. You got lucky. You found really good ones. Now, Alice is a really good coder. Alice is not super up on Linux systems administration. So she ran rm-rf thinking she was in her home directory. She wasn't. She was at the root. She's wondering why that's taking so long. At the same time, Bob here, Bob is JavaScript like you can't believe. But Bob and SQL don't really get along very well. He wrote a update query without a where clause. He's wondering why that's taking a long time. You're wondering maybe about whether you hired the greatest Bob and Alice you could have hired, but they're going to be OK. Their faces turn to frowns as they realize they've done something awful in production. And now we have our first split. We need a second project. We need a development environment, because Bob and Alice need to get some guardrails on what they're doing. Both projects are funded by the same single billing account, but now we can divide permissions between them. We can look at the cost of our production environment. It might be many times the size of our dev environment, and we can put them in some silos so they don't blow away prod again. This leads us to another best practice. Use projects to enforce boundaries between workloads, between teams, or when you really need to know about the cost of one set of usage completely partitioned from another. A great way to enforce policy. Now, probably many of you have multiple projects already in GCP. So let's move on. Let's look at how you actually see the cost of these projects and then add some more complexity as we grow our company. Well, the first way you're going to see these costs is with your invoice at the end of the month. And your invoice tells you your company, its address, how much you owe Google, and some degree of breakdown about those costs on a project and resource level. The invoice is great for one thing. It's great for telling you how much you owe. But it's not really a great cost report. You can't slice it and dice it. There is both a PDF and a CSV. And you can slice and dice the CSV a little bit. But we'll look at a much better way to do those kinds of questions rather than firing up a spreadsheet and going and querying it that way. Second tool, billing reports. Now we're getting to an interactive way to slice and dice cost. And we'll look at some real examples, slice and diced by project, by organization, by label in a few minutes. Finally, the BigQuery billing export. I mentioned this at the beginning, this first best practice. Really easy to turn it on, and we'll look at some real data in a few minutes about what you can get out of it. To turn on your BigQuery export, go to your billing account, click on the billing export link, and you'll be able to turn on that export and put it into a project. So another best practice. Use the billing reports and exports to answer the why questions. Use your invoice to reason about what you owe Google, that kind of bottom line. By the way, if your invoice ever grows beyond 25 pages in a PDF, we'll start to collapse it down so we don't send you the world's largest PDF to try and open in your poor web browser. The CSV version of the invoice is full detail, always, as big as it gets. So our startup is growing. Bob and Alice now have dozens of teammates, and we're going to put an organization to help manage policy and control all of these projects in our world now. Probably a best practice to do from the start, but the startup didn't know that, so they're evolving as they go. So we've grown. We have a whole range of projects. We decided we wanted to put a staging environment in the middle of dev and prod. We have our macro service, that old legacy big old pile of code somewhere that's chugging away. The founder made a project called Top Secret. Don't look there. There's an archive for old stuff. But yay, we're growing turns into help. We're growing. when you start to get beyond the tens of projects. It gets hard to reason about the world, gets hard to partition policies, permissions, and control. So what can we do here? Well, first, we're working on a feature which hasn't yet launched, but we'll start to roll out to customers later this year, to have one default billing account for the entire organization. And when that's live, you won't have to reason about billing accounts on a per project basis. You can set it and forget it at the organization level. So that's something that's coming. Once we get into this multi-project world, the same tools still apply, but you start to have a need to filter and slice and dice to understand costs below the organization level, using some of the structural concepts we talked about earlier. So this is a real billing report, and this shows a number of projects all grouped together. There's a couple of other sessions that go deep into this tool, but I'll give you the highlights here today. Billing reports let you drill into cost by the mechanisms I just described. And here we have them broken by project. So I've opened up this filter to let me see by project. I can tick those off and change how I group and show cost over time to see what's growing and what's shrinking. And obviously, sometime mid-March, we ramped up a lot of usage, and we see that across all those projects. I can do a similar kind of reporting using any of the data that we have in my BigQuery billing export. For those fans of SQL among us, this is the 13 lines of SQL that generated a report grouped by the project, which is the project ID in this column under ID. The BigQuery billing export is giving you very fine-grained detail on your usage. So you'll have one row for each couple of hours of usage by service, by application, by project, by label. And you can query it as you like. You can also press that magical Explore in Data Studio link and go out into a world of visualization and reporting tools that work incredibly well with BigQuery. There are a couple of other sessions that go deep with actual customer examples of that. We'll talk about that at the end, and I'll let you know about those sessions. The invoice also ships a CSV, which I mentioned a couple minutes ago. For completeness, this is what it looks like. You'll see billing account, billing account ID, project name, what product you're running, the resource type, networking versus compute, IDs, dates, amounts of usage, the kind of fields you would expect, but not at the level of granularity of our BigQuery export. So the takeaway from this section, from a control and policy perspective, organizations are for everyone. They're a great thing to turn on, whether or not you use G Suite and all of the other apps that sit alongside in a domain. Anyone can turn on an org and its associated identity as a service for free. And that's a great best practice. Now, we ended our organization part being in a little bit of trouble. We had a lot of projects, and the world was only growing. And you can start to see the delineations where these projects are really in buckets. The first column is stages or environments of our application. The second column is our macro service, our old legacy stuff that we broke out. We've got some acquisitions now. Top secret's still there, don't mention it. Archive. We can put in a layer of folders to start to control who can see each of those resources and start to manage the cost and be able to report on cost by folder. And there are different ways to structure it. In one form, you can structure it by environment, if that suits you. In another form, you can structure it by the logical application. You could structure it by team, by department, by country. You're going to align these folders to how you work and the structure that makes the most sense for you. And you can have a lot of them. They nest. You can have as many folders as you need to contain your projects. By the way, you can have thousands of projects. No problem. Platform scales up to many, many, many thousands. We have customers with one. We have customers with tens of thousands. So folders mirror how you work. But they're not the only way to structure resources and not the only way to bucket them. And you can think of them a little bit like a primary key. A project can only be in one folder. But we need something else to answer questions like, how much did I spend on databases across this entire set of applications and tools? Tough to answer by folder, because I have databases kind of all over the place. Let's just take the app folder and expand that out and see how many things are actually a database here. Well, I've got some MySQL servers running on bare metal GCE, so to speak. I've installed them myself. They don't run in Cloud SQL. Those are databases. So let's label those instances with a key and value. The key is type, value is database. Now I can do some cross-cutting reporting within this folder and across these projects to see how much I spent across my databases. Turns out I've got databases in a lot of other places. Let's say I added a bunch of Postgres down in Cloud SQL, and I have backups in production, really big ones. And I want to attribute those costs to my databases that they're backups of. I don't want to confuse them with other data that's running in my environment. So labels on Compute Engine, labels in Cloud SQL, labels in Cloud Storage, and now I can report across them to roll up cost. As I mentioned, there are trade-offs here. You can think of a folder a little bit like a primary key. Each project can live only in one folder. They can be nested, but it can only have one parent. And you can think of labels as like a set of secondary indexes on your resources and on your projects. It's worth being deliberate in this design in both cases. It's worth being really deliberate in your folder design, because while it's easy to move projects around, it might be disruptive for policy and permissions to be shuffling folders all the time. In labels, it's worth thinking about governance, about the keys that you require and the values they contain, so that Alice doesn't say type:\db on a label, and Bob says type:\database, and all of a sudden we're living in two different reporting worlds. So be deliberate. Some workloads will automatically annotate their resources with labels for you. So if you use Deployment Manager, and certain other services will auto-tag resources, and you can piggyback on those to do reporting automatically and cross-cut. So what does the world look like if we want to cross-cut by label in these two reporting contexts? First, in my reporting view, I can both filter and group by label. And here I've done it with my environment label. And I've got production, test, and dev that cross-cut across all my projects. There are 18 projects that are rolled up in this view. And this is the usage of those labels spanning all of those projects. If I drop into BigQuery, I can take just about the same 13 lines of SQL we saw before, and I added a little bit more. It's a nested field. So we added a couple of lines to both unnest those labels and to put in a where clause where we have labels.key is env. Now we've cross-cut that high-resolution billing data by label, and we've got a per month, per service cost for each of those resources running across our entire environment. And of course, that magic button is still there, Explore in Data Studio, if you want to slice and dice and visualize. Labels are like supercharging your reporting. The way we think about them as a best practice is they shouldn't be the end-all, be-all of your reporting. Don't rely exclusively on labels. Start with an org, put projects in folders, use a sensible project layout, but then when you want to supercharge, add on this layer, and you can really dive deep into cost. So it's a fantastic way to help with those gnarly cross-cutting cases. A couple of advanced topics, and then we'll leave a good bit of time for questions. First, as I mentioned at the beginning, billing IAM, billing identity and access management, and resource IAM, the roles and permissions on billing accounts and projects are completely separate. You can give your finance team billing account admin permissions. They'll be a super user. They can run their queries in BigQuery. They can look at billing reports. They can do absolutely everything you can do on a billing account, but they will not be able to go and actually use resources, see resources, change settings in projects because those worlds are split. That's a very intentional choice. There are other roles on billing accounts that offer fewer permissions, the ability to create them and view them, but not to have that level of administrative control. There are a couple of best practices once you start to think about this kind of larger organization billing. One of them is parent your billing accounts in your organization just like projects. It's not required, but it's a good practice to do, so you get that central control over the roles on your billing accounts too. Put all your projects in your organization, especially if you're in transition, and remove the billing account creator role from your org. For the vast majority of customers, one billing account is the only billing account you'll ever need. A billing account corresponds to a single invoice in a single currency, and most customers are fine with one. Some very large customers or customers with special needs will have multiple billing accounts. They might operate in multiple currencies. They might have a complex jurisdictional situation or departments that really want their own separate invoice. And in that case, they'll stray and have multiple invoices, multiple billing accounts. But one is typically good enough. Once you take that creator role away, anyone creating a project will always land that project in the org, and it will always be funded by your org's single billing account. So from a governance perspective, you're covered. As I mentioned, fewer are better, and a couple of advanced scenarios why you might stray into having multiple billing accounts, and I'm happy to answer questions about that if you have questions about whether that's right for you and right for your company. There's a session which I'll show on a slide later on the schedule, Cost 200, which talks about a level above, kind of in the Google world, above cloud, and how your organization and its domain relate to some other things outside the Google Cloud world. You might have an ads account. You might be paying for G Suite. There's a separate payments profile that lives above cloud that spans all of those products. And if you're an administrator of an organization, especially a large organization, or have a controllership or governance kind of concern, this is probably an interesting session for you, and I'll show you where that is in the schedule in a moment. Last best practice, everyone in cloud, every customer from the smallest to the largest get free cloud billing support. We have a wonderful support team that is here to help with billing questions. We recognize that billing can be stressful. And it's really, really important that we answer your questions, solve the concerns and problems you have. So please always feel free to reach out. There are links throughout the Cloud Console that let you click through and get a question answered by our dedicated billing team. You can grant that billing team access to your BigQuery billing export. And they will be very thankful if you do that, if you have a really gnarly question, because they'll be able to go look at that same super high granularity billing data that you see and help reason about questions and concerns. So, in summary, enable BigQuery billing export on day one. It's almost zero cost. We give you 10 gigs of BigQuery for free. It's 2 cents a gig after that. You're going to be a pretty large customer before you have gigs of big billing export data. That'll be the last cost you notice. So turn that on day one. Use projects to enforce the boundaries between teams or workloads or sensitive contexts within your applications. And those will be reflected in your billing data at that project level. When you're trying to answer why, go first to cost reporting tools and second to your invoice. The invoice is how much you owe. Cost reporting lets you do that slicing and dicing. Organizations are for everyone. Identity as a service is free. We encourage you to use it, associate it with your domain, and get that level of policy and control at the top level from day one. Use folders to mirror how you work. A project can only live in one, so think about that as kind of the primary key. And then supercharge your reporting by adding labels that cross-cut across resources and across projects to get that extra level of detail. And finally, cloud billing support is here to help. Please reach out. They'd love to field your questions and help with billing concerns. There are 4 other sessions that I'll point out. There are 12 cost management sessions happening at Next, but there are 4 that I think are particularly interesting for this audience as kind of a deeper dive into these tools and into real customer data. Cost 202, which is better insight, measuring the cost of an application on GCP, is target. We'll be diving in with some other billing product managers. That's today at 220. Cost 200 is going up a level and looking at how your organization and your billing accounts relate in the bigger picture, how to think about governance and control. Cost 201 on Wednesday afternoon is a financial governance session looking at budgets and alerts, a feature we haven't really talked about, but there's a full set of budgeting APIs and alert APIs that let you set thresholds in your projects. And finally, on Thursday, another customer deep dive, beyond your bill, getting more detail into cost. A look at more detail in an actual customer example of BigQuery, Data Studio, and how to slice and dice with real data. These are all linked off of cloud.google.com/cost-management as well. And these slides will be available for your review later on. All right, that's the end of our time. Thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of Next.